Good morning. Today I'm going to try to cover Deuteronomy 32, 33, and 34, which was yesterday's readings. And then today we begin with Joshua 1 through 3. So I'll briefly, Deuteronomy 32 is the Song of Moses. And it's kind of like a psalm. The psalms were always meant to be sung. I mean, many of them were that way. But as in the Song of Moses, he reminds them of God's faithfulness. He reminds them of their following away. And he reminds them, that they just rebel against the Lord. And, talks about other nations. They are a nation void of sense. There's no understanding in them. If they were wise, they'd understand. It's a song praising God, reminding the Israelites of their unfaithfulness, and just talking about much of what goes on. And verse 44, it says, Moses came and recited all of these words in the hearing of the people, he and Joshua the son of Nun. And when Moses finished, he said, take heart, all the words that I'm giving in witness against you today, in them is a command to your children, to observe and follow the Lord. And then chapter 33 is Moses' final blessing to the Israelites, and each tribe, it's a reminder that God led us out of wilderness, and like Reuben and Levi, and each of the tribes are mentioned with a blessing that way. In chapter 34, Moses went up, it says, from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Mount Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and God showed him the land, and this is the land, the promised land that the Israelites will inherit. But I have given it to your descendants, and you will see it. And in verse 5, Moses, the son of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command, and he was buried in a valley opposite, Moab, and no one knows where he was buried, so that they wouldn't make a shrine out of Moses' grave. And and it tells us that Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired. His vigor had not abated. But at that point in his life, God called him home, and Moses died. And God had given Moses this strength to lead the Israelites. It was, when Moses was young, he had fled from Egypt. And when he was 40 years old, God had called him to go and lead the people out of Egypt. And then they wandered these, and when he was gone all those years, and when he was 80 years old, God called him to come back. I'm sorry. But after Moses' death and burial, the Israelites mourned his death. And verse 10, never again, since then has risen a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. The other prophets, like Elijah, he saw the Lord pass by, he saw his back, but Moses was the one who had conversed face to face with God, and his face and his appearance had been changed by that, so that he had to wear this veil in the presence of the people. So with concluding the reading of Deuteronomy, we've finished the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the books of the law, the books, some of history. And when we start, the books of, starting with Joshua now that we're going to start, the historical books come next. And even though Numbers and Deuteronomy were the story of the people in the wilderness, and much history there. But now we're going to continue through the history after the people have come to the promised land. And with Joshua, he was one of the 2 who had been sent as spies into the promised land that came back saying, well, we can do this. Joshua and Caleb had been those 2, and Joshua is the one chosen by God to succeed Moses as the leader of the people. And I can, I feel so much for Joshua as, to follow on the heels of of a person like Moses to now be the leader and to have the people look up to him, you know, and how much was he compared to Moses, you know, because that's what we do as people. You know, we compare our former president, our new president, our pastor, I mean, whatever. We compare people in our lives to someone else. And I think of the comparisons that Joshua had to Moses by the people. But it begins, you know, chapter 1 of Joshua. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua. So, you know, and he says, my servant Moses is dead. Now proceed across the Jordan, you and all the people. And then verse 5, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. So I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous. And then again, verse 7, only be strong and courageous, careful to act in accordance with the law. Verse 9, I command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so God comes to Joshua with these words of encouragement, words of promise, you know, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. You know, I am going to lead, I'm going to guide, I'm going to be with you, just as I was with Moses. And just as the time with Moses, people are going to be disobedient, and they're going to mess up and all of that, everything and else going on. But, you know, God's words to Joshua 3 times in here, you know, I will not fail you. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. I will be with you. You know, it's just the promise of God to be with Joshua as he leads his people. And so Joshua goes to the commanding officers of the people and passes through the camp, and he says, prepare your divisions, for in 3 days we depart to cross the Jordan to take possession of the land. And you know, he said, remember the word that Moses commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you, and he will give you this land. And verse 16, they all answered Joshua, all that you have commanded we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go, just as we obeyed Moses. You know, and I'm thinking, yeah, they really obeyed Moses really well all the time, just like they really obeyed God all the time. You know, but they say, just as we obeyed Moses in all things, we will obey you. May the Lord God be with you as he was with Moses. And, you know, so it's, you know, they have the best of intentions. And so often, I mean, so do we. I mean, we have the best intentions of doing the right thing, of trying to stay away from the sin. You know, we've got that best of intentions, but things happen. Chapter 2, Joshua sends 2 men secretly as spies to the land ahead. And he says, go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and they entered the city, and they stayed at the house of a prostitute named Rahab. And here again, it's one of those instances where God uses people that are often shunned by society. I mean, a prostitute wouldn't be a prominent citizen of the city, no. But this is where the spies spent the night there. And the king of Jericho was told, hey, some Israelites are here. And, you know, these people were afraid of the Israelites. They were camped at the border, at the river Jordan, and they were, you know, they're going to come. You know, this is the promised land. And so the king sets men out to find these Israelites, to arrest them. But the women hid, this woman hid these guys. We know, I mean, this is a familiar story to me anyway, but Rahab hides these men, and as the king's soldiers come looking, she lets them out of the window, over the wall, you know, of the gate of the land, of the city. You know, the city had walls around it, and there were windows that she let these men out and down so that they would be safe. And she asked that, you know, she and her household would be spared when the Israelites came. And they told her, you know, to tie a crimson cord in the window. And so, you know, the story is all there. But when she sent them away, they departed. In verse 21, she tied a crimson cord in her window. This was to let the Israelites know where she lived so that they would spare her. And so these spies went back into the country, stayed there, and those searching for them could not find them. So chapter 3, early in the morning, they rise and they set out with all the Israelites, and they come to the river Jordan. And God says to them, when you come to the river Jordan, stop, stand still. And the priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, let them get their feet into the water, and I will part the waters. And so here, just as God parted the Red Sea for the Israelites as they fled captivity or slavery in Egypt, God parts the Jordan River as the people of Israel cross on dry ground into the promised land. And that's verse 13, when the soles of the feet of the priests rest upon the waters will be flowing, will be cut off, and they will stand in a single heap. This is what God says to Joshua. And when they get there, this is what happens. It says the Jordan overflows its banks in the spring, but the waters stopped flowing from above. And it says, verse 17, all Israel were crossing over on dry ground. The priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan River until the entire nation had crossed over. So we see, again, the partings of the waters as God leads his people. And the promise of God to Joshua, he calls Joshua, be strong and courageous, for I am with you wherever you go. And God does faithfully lead his people with his servant Joshua.